and how to spell it.
People used to cheat off of my test in English in high school because I would always get them and I didn't even study.
All right, we're on. Well, again, welcome everyone. We're going to take a look now at chapter 33 of Genesis, called This Looks Can Be Deceiving. And when does this take place? It seems like it could be between 1745 and 1725 BC. So this is a long time ago, this story. And we just looked at chapter 32 when Jacob is about to face his brother Esau. And so let's go ahead and jump into this. Chapter 33, verse 1. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind them, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. So here comes Esau and his 400 men. This can't look good. And notice that he is coming as Jacob, not Israel, as I mentioned in the last chapter. Whenever we see him called Jacob, it's usually because he's operating in the flesh. And when the Lord calls him Israel in the scriptures, usually because he's operating in the spirit. So he comes as Jacob, and it's still the old man trying to become the new man. It says he lifted up his eyes. And again, that word is NASA, NASA. We have a program called NASA where we looked up. It was intentional. We were headed to the stars and out of space. That's where that word came from. And it says his eyes, ayin, meaning his best appearance. He's trying to put on the best appearance he possibly can. We see this again later in 1 Samuel 1:18, and it says his countenance was no more sad. So it kind of gives us a picture here. He's trying to smile, put his best face forward, if you will. In Psalm 27:3, it says, though a host should camp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. So Jacob is expecting a confrontation. And so he arranges his family by where his heart is. Take a look at this. Again, we could read past this and not really see the significance. The concubines and their kids are first. If you pay any attention to what's happening in Israel today with Hamas, that basically these people are out front as human shields. If Esau's coming to do damage, well, put the concubines and those kids first. Second is Leah. Remember, she was the mad cow and her kids. He loves her, but not as much as Rachel. So Leah and her kids come second. In other words, better her than Rachel. And finally, Rachel and Joseph come up, pulling up the rear. They will be the safest of the bunch. She's the woman he loved. As we're going to see, he's the son he loves the most. And clearly these are his 2 favorites. And so he saved the best for the last. And then he goes before them and leads the procession. And perhaps Esau is going to kill me and let my family live. Maybe that's what he was thinking. Right? Earlier, he was sending him all kinds of things ahead of him. Now he's going out front. So you wonder, some have said, well, this is a sign of bravery. Or is this his wanting to die first so he doesn't have to see what's going to happen as an outcome to the rest of his family? I don't know. But it says he bowed 7 times. Now, this shows submission and a sign of respect. In the Tel Amarna tablets, you learn all kinds of things when you do the studies. It's proper to bow 7 times when meeting and greeting a king. You would take a bow, then you would take 7 steps, then you would bow again, over and over and over till you bowed 7 times. And Esau was literally a king over the Mount Seir area, which is known as Edom. Edom means red. Esau was red looking with hairy red hair all over his body. So that's what the area that he's king over is called. So Jacob is showing honor to his older brother. Basically, what he's doing with all the gifts he sent and now the way he's coming at him with his family is that I'm coming humbly. I recognize that you are the ruler of this area. But Jacob is a prince and he doesn't need to be bowing here. He's being Jacob. He's not trusting God that God is going to watch over him and take care of him. Now, as I was reading this, I was thinking my brothers and sister went their separate ways in life, and they've done great things in their lives, yet they still come and listen to these teachings. And we may live a lot of miles apart, but our hearts are still united. And that's humbling to me, and I believe God honors that. And I pray all of our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids will do the same towards one another, towards each one of our families, because we are, after all, one family naturally and now spiritually. And we should be showing honor to one another. And question is, what might have happened if Jacob came intending to show that he still had the birthright? I mean, think about that. But verse 4 says Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him. Obviously, he's forgiven him. And they wept. I don't know what the 400 men did. They probably just stayed behind and watched this whole thing develop. I don't know if they knew they were just there to keep him company or whether they thought they were in for a fight. I have no idea because the passage doesn't tell us. But this sounds a lot like the story of the father with the prodigal son, running and hugging and kissing and forgiving and crying. I mean, and today in the promised land, if an Arab comes running at you, he probably has a knife in his hand or he's wearing an explosive vest. So this has got to be a scary thing for Jacob to see coming at him. But in Proverbs 21:1, it says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. Not in our hand, but in the hand of the Lord. Just as the rivers of water, he turns them wherever he will. And clearly here, the Lord has changed Esau's heart. So this should be a great life lesson for us, a memory verse, if you will. Maybe you have a terrible boss or miserable neighbor, whatever it might be, the Lord can change their hearts. Turn them over to the boss or to your boss, the Lord, and see what he does with the person that's giving you so much trouble. Now imagine the emotion here. Jacob, he's not going to kill me and my family. He doesn't have a knife and he's not wearing an explosive vest. And Esau, look, my brothers come home. There's no mention here that they discussed the past issues. The past was in the past. And that's what forgiveness is. We never forget, but we choose not to remember, like God does with us. In Isaiah 43:25, it says, I, even I, am he who blots out your transgressions for my own sake, and I will not remember your sins. I wonder why we remember them when he chooses not to. And then in Mark 10:8, freely you have received this forgiveness, freely give to others. So God answered Jacob's prayer. Remember the prayer he made. This is the time, Lord, if you're ever going to come through. And God kept his promise. He's true to his word. His word never fails. He turned a potential war into a family reunion. And remember, he did the same thing with Laban, saying, don't do anything to Jacob. I imagine Esau got a warning somewhere along the way. So how much we need the nations to turn to God and to turn all the wars and rumors of wars into reunions. Wouldn't that be awesome? Well, prayer works. Maybe God can change people's hearts. Maybe he'll change some of the nation's hearts. Esau turns into Uncle Esau. And a spiritual truth for us, if we have a family war going on, God can turn it into a reunion and a party if we just trust him with it. But we probably need to take the first step because we're the ones the Lord's speaking to. Now, in Proverbs 16:7, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. That's a good one to hang on to. So, verse 5, and he lifted his eyes and he saw the women and the children. This is Esau. And he said, who are these with you? All that stress for nothing, all that fear that Satan kept whispering in Jacob's ear, how horrible this was going to turn out. You're all going to get slaughtered. None of it happened. That's how things we fear usually turn out. He whispers something in our ear, we believe it, we go to pieces worrying about it, and then it doesn't even come to pass. And so Jacob says, the children whom God has graciously given your servant, their gifts. Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and they bowed down. And then Leah also came near with her children, they bowed down. And afterward, pulling up the rear, Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. So in other words, these are your two sisters-in-law, my two concubines, your 11 nephews, and your one niece. These are gifts that God has given to me. So remember, there's 11 boys to Jacob at this point in time, and one daughter named Dinah. And we're about to read about the next son and Dinah soon. In Psalm 107:41, we're told, but he rescues the poor from trouble and increases their families like flocks of sheep. So a spiritual truth for us would be our kids are gifts from God. Sometimes they might seem like a gag gift, but we need to see them through spiritual eyes. They're all arrows in our quiver. And I see my kids, my grandkids, and my two great grandsons as blessings from the Lord. I never earned or deserved such a blessing. Thank you, Lord. In verse 8, then Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? In other words, this drove of animals. And he said, well, these are to find favor with you in the sight of my Lord. So the company is the droves of the animals that were sent earlier. And it would look like the gifts confused Esau. He doesn't seem to be exhibiting that he's his superior here. You don't owe me anything. We're just brothers. So another spiritual truth. Many people feel like they need to pray and pay and obey to receive God's favor. We already have his favor when we surrender to him. We don't have to do anything to earn more favor. We have all the favor he can ever give us. We just have to receive it. Do those things, praying and paying and obeying, because you love him, not because you owe him. We don't owe him anything but our total commitment. Now, religion, on the other hand, says that Jesus did 90% and you need to do the other 10%, right? Work. You need to kick in something, at least pick up the tip. And God says, no, Jesus did the whole 100%, including the tip. You don't have to do anything but believe. So, verse 9, Esau said, I have enough, brother. Keep what you have for yourself. In other words, it's not necessary. I have plenty of my own. I have all I need. Keep yours for your family. And he's a picture of 1 Timothy 6:6. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Now, I'm impressed with Esau here. He's saying, I have enough. It's rob or rab in the Hebrew, meaning I have enough. I have an abundance. I have more than I'll ever need. So it's much like we're eating with someone and they offer another serving and we say, no, I'm stuffed. I couldn't eat another bite. That's basically what Esau's saying to him. And I wish more people, particularly Christians, would say the same instead of frantically chasing after more and more stuff, right? Be content with what the Lord provides. In Philippians 4:18, I have all and abound. I am full. I think that's how the Lord wants us to look at life and what he's already given us. Verse 10 says, Jacob said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I have seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. Please take my blessings that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. So he urged him, and Esau took him. So as an observation here, Jacob didn't offer Esau the spiritual blessing, the birthright, but the firstborn blessing, which is material. So Jacob's saying, I'm sorry, and Esau is saying, apology accepted. And the spiritual blessing is God's alone to give. Jacob can't give that away. And Isaac could never have given it to Esau. It was neither of theirs to give. It was God's to give, and he had given it to Jacob before he was ever delivered at birth. So Jacob insists on Esau taking the gift because this is essentially, in their culture, making a covenant. So the word enough that Jacob uses, it's a different word here. It's kol, K-O-L, not as much as you, but I have a lot, more than enough. So Esau responds, let us take our journey. Let us go, and I'll go before you. In other words, let's go, and I'll give you the Navy SEAL escort here. I'll protect all of you. And in verse 13, Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them too hard one day, all the flock will die. Please let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock can go before me, and the children are able to endure until I come to my Lord in Seir. So basically, no, that's okay. They part in peace. And I can see a future problem had they gone ahead and lived together, because Esau was worldly and Jacob now is trying to be godly. They'd be unequally yoked. In verse 40, verse 11 of Isaiah, it says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. Well, this is what a shepherd does. However, maybe Jacob is still a little leery of his brother. As we see below, he never does go to Mount Seir, where Esau dwells. And it seems that he never intended to go to Mount Seir. He just said that. What would that be called? A deception. He lies again to his brother. That's why he's being called Jacob here in this passage. Well, Esau says, verse 15, now let me leave you with some of the people who are with me. So, okay, I'll take most of the guys with me. How about if I just leave you with SEAL Team 6, right? Just in case you need a little bit of help. And Jacob says, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way back to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth, built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. We've probably all heard that name. So let's take a look at these verses. Notice, why does Moses call him Jacob here and not Israel? Because he's acting like Jacob again. He's not going down to the south towards Seir. He lags behind. He lets his brother get a little ways ahead of him. He turns around and heads to the north, the exact opposite direction of where he said he was going to go. So one of the commentators called him Israel instead of Israel or Jacob. He called him Israel. He's trying to be two people at once, double-minded, as we looked at in the last chapter. He's straddling the fence spiritually still. Now, Seir, the name means hairy or rough. Remember, that's Esau's name, basically. It says Jacob builds a house. This is not a sojourner in a tent. He was never called to build a house. So he's being obedient by being deceiving, and he's being disobedient by building a house. He's setting down roots right here. He was called to be a sojourner. So he's disobeying his calling. The last guy who built the house was Lot. And remember, that didn't turn out so good. Then it says booths. And booths is basically, it's like a bushcraft shelter. You make it out of branches and leaves. And the word is Sukkoth. It means booths. It means a temporary shelter. That's what he should have been living in as well as the animals. It's the place where Israel stopped when they made the exodus from Egypt. It became an annual festival. It's called the Tabernacle, Feast of Tabernacles or Feast of Booths for the Hebrews, right? So this is sort of a compromise, right? I'm here in a house, so I'm only halfway disobedient, Lord. Now, Kathy and I and the kids went to a family camp once in California, and we were celebrating the feast of booths. And each family actually built their own Sukkoth or booth or bushcraft shelter, if you will. And I assure you, you wouldn't want to have spent a night in the one that we built. Kathy and we're really more of the motel kind of campers. And so they go their separate ways physically, but at least together they're in the spirit. Now, verse 18, it says, Then Jacob came safely to the city Shalem of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. That's the land he's supposed to be in. When he came from Padan Aram, that's where he got his wife, and he pitched his tent before the city. So now he's moving on. And he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent. So thank God he's living in a tent now. From the children of Hamor, who we'll hear more of in the next chapter. Shechem's father, we'll hear of him, for 100 pieces of money. And there he erected an altar there, and he called it El Elohi Israel. So later called Sychar. This place will be called Sychar, and you may remember that in John 4:4. This is where Jesus meets the woman, the Samaritan woman at the well that Jacob built. Right? So here's a passage that's pointing all the way forward to John 4:4. It says, Then came. So he basically stayed in a house with booths for his cattle for a period of time and then moved on towards where he's supposed to be. This is probably taken between 10 and 15 years based on the history that we have. It says Shalem, and that should sound familiar because it's basically the same Hebrew word as Shalom or Jerusalem. So we all know that. It means complete, friendly, safe, peaceable, shalom. Jehovah Shalom, the God of peace, right? That's where we get that. It means whole, and boy, does he ever need it to be peaceable and whole today in the land of Israel. So the meaning probably is that he came in peace to Shechem. So as an observation here, God told him to return where? To Bethel or Bethel in Genesis 31, verse 13 that we studied a while back. So he's being partially obedient again. He's acting like Jacob. And then Shechem means a ridge or a back or a shoulder. So he never does go to Esau. He's still deceiving people. He's about 25 miles short of Bethel. He could have told Esau that God told me to go to Bethel. So that's where I'm going to need to go. But it's sure great seeing you again and being on friendly terms. And I'll come and visit you or something. And Dad, Mom. I mean, he could have been honest. But to be fair, maybe Jacob realized that he could be reconciled with Esau, but they could never live together. It's possible. But that doesn't explain his disobedience of not going all the way to Bethel. So I'm thinking both of these are negatives. Nevertheless, in 2 Corinthians 6:14, we're told, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? So Shechem is a wicked place, and it's going to turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes Jacob has ever made. We'll see that the next time. So he pitched his tent before. That word means facing Shechem. So this is kind of like Lot when he was at Sodom and Gomorrah. As you'll recall, he pitched his tent facing Sodom and Gomorrah, and then he moved closer to town by the gate. Then he built the house inside the city, right? He's moving closer and closer to someplace he's not supposed to be. Then it says he bought the parcel. The word is kanar, kel-ka, more accurately pronounced. It means he bought it, he purchased it, he possessed it, he took ownership of it. So this is the second land purchase that I see in the promised land. Remember that Abraham, his grandfather, bought the caves at Machpelah where they're buried. A lot of the patriots are buried. So this purchase was made years and years back ago, almost 2,000 years ago, if not longer. And yet, Muhammad and Islam didn't arrive on the scene until roughly 600 AD. So, at a minimum, this is like 2,600 years apart. Should be pretty clear who owns the land of Israel. So, if you get into one of those conversations, remember this: it belonged to Israel 2,600 years before Muhammad existed. It says he bought it for 100 pieces of money. And as I studied this, this appears to be a coin that had the picture of a lamb engraved on it. And later on, it was called, and it's still called the Africa Casita. Now, notice he's not trying to bargain or swindle here. He just pays for the land outright. So at least here, he's growing in faith. And the years aren't given here, but he probably stayed here for many more years, another 10 to 15 years, before finally moving on to Hebron. Now, that word Hamor that we're going to be reading about in a next chapter, I think the next chapter, means donkey. So apparently Hamor was a Canaanite jackass, according to his parents. But he was a Hivite prince in Shechem. It also refers to reddish in color. So think Esau again. So it can mean donkey. It can also mean reddish in color. So there's always multiple meanings to these words. An altar is mizbayah. It was done at every special event from Noah forward to mark a place that needed to be in remembrance of God's faithfulness. And that's why I brought this up to us on so many occasions as another spiritual truth, how important it is for us as believers to place a spiritual mental altar everywhere where God has encountered us or we've encountered him. When we were saved, when he met us in a difficult situation, when he answered a panicked prayer that we threw up, when we're facing a difficult decision or situation, we can go back to that altar in our mind, to that place, and remember he was faithfully there in the past, and he'll be faithful to me now. So, however, Jacob is not obeying God right now. He's being religious by building this altar. He's not being obedient. And he's going to remember this place, believe me, but it's not because God is meeting him there. Psalm 24, verses 3 and 4, it says, who may climb the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? Only those whose hands and hearts are pure, who do not worship idols and never tell lies. Lying is serious business. And every one of us have told a lie. And if you say, no, I never have, then you just told one. We've all done it. It's a serious thing. We've got to be sure we're not telling lies now. In 1 Samuel 15, verses 24 to 26, it's amazing these verses come back to me because I studied Samuel's and Kings and Chronicles months and months, probably 2 years ago. But Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words because I feared the people and I obeyed their voice. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, nope, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. It's over. It's done. We wrestled. I wrestled with you all night, and when the light shined, you wouldn't stop. Another picture of Jacob wrestling with the Lord. Saul kept wrestling, refused to give in. And finally, the Lord said, that's it. Like with Pharaoh, that's it. I've had enough. And so I encourage everyone that reads the story, everyone that might listen to this, we can't disobey God and get blessed. As believers, we won't lose our salvation, but we can lose our calling and never accomplish what he's called us to do and live with that throughout eternity. That there was so much more we could have done and we missed it. Now he names this El Elohi Israel. El Elohim means rulers or judges or divine ones. And it's in the plural. So why do I even tell you that? Because think of the Trinity. The true God of Israel is a Trinity. They said Trinity's not in the Bible. El Elohi Israel is in the plural. God is in the plural, more than one. He's one, but more than one. Now, it's no longer the God of his fathers. Remember the God of Israel, Jacob? He's planning to stay now. So God is no longer the God of Abraham and Isaac alone. He's now the God of Israel, Jacob's new name. So while building this altar was a good thing, he was still not being obedient. And in 1 Samuel 15:22, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as he does in obeying the voice of the Lord? To behold, to obey is better than sacrifice. So we're getting close here. The characters in this story. I didn't bother with that in the last one because that lesson was so long. But let's look at Jacob here. Jacob won on the positive side. He's very brave, going out front confidently, looking up with a smile on his face, being respectful to his brother. He's trusting in God. It shows that he's growing. On the negative side, he's still only partially obeying the Lord. He's being double-minded, and you will not succeed that way. He doesn't return to Bethel as God had instructed him to do. So he's being disobedient. He's intentionally deceiving his brother again. It's sort of like, don't call me, I'll call you type of thing, right? He prays for protection and deliverance, and then he puts his own plan in place. I don't know how many times I've done that. And you guys, if you're being honest with yourself, probably say, yeah, I've done the same thing. Well, the question is, do we ever do that? Pray, ask God to take the ball on this situation and turn around, grab the ball and run with it ourselves. If we hand the ball off to the Lord, we should just leave it with him. He's much better at carrying it than we are. Now, Esau, in this chapter, all I have is on the positive side. He let bygones be bygones. We see him, he's very gracious. He offers protection to his brother. He offers him a safe place to settle down and live. I mean, he is far more honorable in this chapter than Jacob is. And then just to mention here on the negative side is Rachel. Because as we'll read in the next chapter, while she's not a player in this chapter we're reading, she's still carrying her idols. She's holding on to her old life and her old ways, the idols she stole from her father, Laban. She's bringing all that old baggage along with her. And so from her, we could see another truth is that so many Christians try to bring along their old habits and their old ways into their new life in Christ. It doesn't work. The Lord will not compete with anything. There will be no other gods before him, and anything that we consider above and beyond him is an idol for us. Your savings account, your job, your position, um, whatever it is, if that's the most important thing going for you, your savings account, you better be careful because he'll take it away. He's not going to compete. So there's a change here. Both brothers have changed. So is possible to change? Yeah, all things are possible with God. In Matthew 19:26, Jesus looked at them intently or with those fiery eyes, and he said, humanly speaking, it's impossible. But with God, everything is possible. And Leo Tolstoy said, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. And how true that is when I read that. Now, I saw in business how hard it was for people to change, particularly in the telephone company, when every time we heard we're having an organization change. And people resist. We resist change. We don't like it. We never like to change. We'd rather remain stuck in the same old place. We complain about the job place. Then they say we're going to make a change in the organization. We go, I don't want to change. And we just stay stuck in the same old place. The Lord wants us growing and changing into the likeness of Jesus. Didn't want us to stay the way we are. He wants to do an organizational change in our lives. And so in our spiritual lives, we need to embrace the change and not fight against it. Leighton Ford, you may recognize his name. He worked with Billy Graham. He said, God loves the way you are, but he loves you too much to leave you that way. And so if you're feeling afflicted and beat up where you are in life, is it possible the Lord's trying to change something? And if so, ask him to show you where he wants to lead you. Don't get in a wrestling match. In Psalm 119:67, I used to wander off until you discipline me. Now I closely follow your word. That's great advice. And so my final thought here is that did these brothers actually reconcile? It appears to me that Esau was willing to forgive and forget. Right? He offers Jacob protection and provision, a place to come and to live in peace with him. And what did Jacob do? He lied about following behind. He never showed up in Seir. That's not reconciliation. They never discussed what had happened, and they promised to never let it happen again. Right? They simply parted in peace, but they never reconciled. And that's what we're called to in 2 Corinthians 5:18. Now all things are of God who has reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. We're called to that. If we're not reconciled with somebody, we need to get busy getting it straightened out because he's not going to be happy with that. So to close this out, Lord, help us learn this lesson. To obey you is better than to offer you sacrifices. Both are important, but we need to put the two in their proper order. So we're finished now with chapter 33, and the next number of lessons are just amazing. Almost like the last one. I can't believe how much information is in there for us that impacts us today. So hopefully you'll be able to keep up with these and then join us next time as we look at Genesis chapter 34. So that's it, at least, guys. We'll see you guys.